And so let me hit Alt F2. And there's a file in etc FSTAB, and these are the drives that are automatically mounted. And I've put some notes here, but this by default would be probably the only entry after you install and set up Ubuntu. But just using a few of the command line tools, I can actually see the layout of Pegasus. In this case, the server's name is Pegasus. Host name. And the first one, if I use sudo fdisk-l, I can kind of see the partitions. And the way this works, STB, this is a 320 gigabyte serial ATA drive, and it has one partition. Alright, here's a 300 gigabyte, and it's actually a parallel ATA drive, and it too has one partition, SDG. SDH here, this is a 500 gigabyte drive, it's parallel ATA, and it has one partition. And if I come up here, this SDA is a serial ATA drive, it's 320 gigabytes, and it has 6 partitions. And I can tell, this is my Windows system partition here on SDA1, about 105 megabytes, just the boot files for Windows 7. This is the data partition, about 80 gigabytes on the data partition for Windows 7. This is an extended drive, because remember, you can only have 4 primary partitions. So because I needed 2 for Windows 7 and I needed 2 for Linux, and I wanted to have a data partition 5, I've got to use logical drives. I couldn't do everything in primary partitions, or I wouldn't I wouldn't be able to use all of the available space. So basically, I set up an extended partition and then configured some logical drives in partitions. And so here you have a data partition that's about 195, almost 200 gigabytes. And then here you have this is a Linux partition, all right, type 83, and then ext4, and then over here is a type 82 or a Linux swap partition. So we can see all of these partition types, and I just kind of put these over here. In the FSTAB file and the ASCII folder, as in with most config files, the pound symbol here is it's a comment tag. And it just tells Linux, ignore that, don't worry about that. So this way I can kind of put notes into it and show you guys what's going on. So I just labeled all of that here so you can see physical drive 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the partition structure. And also note, all those are SDB, but parallel or ATA drives, IDE drives would normally be HDA, HDB, HTC, and HDD if you're daisy chaining and you have 2 on a port. Here are just some examples of how you might automatically mount FAT32, which is VFAT or NTFS, and we'll go over the syntax of that. This is how you would mount old school, and that's without a UUID, and specifying the user ID, the group ID, and the mask. So kind of an old school mount would just be the device name, which you could get from fdisk with the -L option, the folder you want to mount it to, the type of mount it's going to be, VFAT or NTFS. If it's going to be read and write, it needs to be NTFS-3G. The plain old NTFS is a read-only mount of an NTFS file system, by the way. Auto users or no users. Users mean that any user can mount it. No users, only root can mount it. The user ID could be a name or his ID, and the group ID a name or the group ID of who has permission to access that partition. The directory mask and the file mask, and this works just like umask. Remember, umask is the inverse or the opposite of when you chmod. So if I chmod 777, I give something all permission to the user, to the group, and to other. If I were to umask or set the umask of something to 777, I'm saying remove all permission. So that would be like chmod 00, which wouldn't work. That's impractical, but just to make the case for the point, or to show you, to give you an example. So this works just like the umask, although the dmask is for directories, so dmask. And in this case, we're saying remove nothing, so that would be like chmod 7. And remember, it goes read, write, execute. So in this case, we would be removing write. So that would be like a chmod 5, read and execute. And here we're saying remove everything. So it would be like a chmod 0. That's the directory mask. Now remember, on directories, if you don't have the execute permission, you can't even browse the directory, even if you have read. So you need a combination of read and execute to be able to enter a directory. And finally, the file mask, fmask over here. And again, we're saying remove execute from user. And then this would be the combination of execute and write. And then this would be remove everything. Okay. And then a file system type. And then over here, you know, in this case, we have two more options, and this would be, you know, whether or not we're going to, you know, check it, and whether or not we're going to back it up. We'll take a look at that. Okay, so this is the first method I'm going to try here. Let me go ahead and comment these lines out, and there's a couple of tools that we will use. Okay, and this FSTAB file is loaded every time you boot a Linux server or operating system. The FSTAB file is loaded. So in this case, I'm going to comment these out, and this is sort of the old school way of doing it here. So I want to mount these 4 partitions. Okay. And there's a command that we can use, umount a, and that pretty much, you know, emulates what happens at boot time, and that would load everything that's indicated or listed in your FSTAB file. So I'm going to use that command. Let me go over here, and of course I need root privileges, and I'm just going to say mount -a. And when I enter this command, it's going to read the FSTAB file, and it will go and look for these devices. If you look at the syntax, SDH1, SDG1, SDB1, and SDA4, these are all separate physical drives in different partitions, and it's going to mount them to these 4 folders that I've already created inside of media. And if you want, I'll browse there. But remember that when you mount something, you always have to create a temporary folder to mount it to, or in this case, a permanent one. And let me go to media. And then there's data 1, data 2, data 3, data 4. Okay. And actually, let me I'm not going to be able to unmount. I'm going to have to use a command too. Hang on, let me just mount and 2, 3, 4. Alright, make sure nothing is mounted there. Okay. Alright. Okay, so now with none of those mounted, let me use the mount command, and we'll just make sure. Alright, and so we just have our operating system mount, our ext4, which is our Linux installation, and the swap partition. None of the other partitions are mounted. So, but again, it'll mount it to these folders. I want to make them read and write, so I'm going to use NTFS3G. I'm going to use the default settings, and default. All of these are sort of default settings. So let me save the file. And now I'm going to use the commands of clear and sudo and mount and -a. Okay. And with that command, here are my mounted drives. And so let's take a look. Here's the 500 gig. And kind of just threw the icon over there, but let me just drag that over there with it. Alright, so the two 300 gig partitions, a 500 gig and 185 gigabyte.